So, you've got a couple Scrum teams, and things are going well. But those Scrum teams, they're isolated, stuck on little islands of agility. This situation is both common and a problem. Agile teams are supposed to be the engines driving innovation, creation, and value delivery. But the rest of the organization, the non-agile pieces, they can act like a governor on that engine, says Scrum Inc's Avi Schneier.
The agility of your business is governed by the least agile portion.
So you start to think big. Let's scale. Let's change the whole organization. You grab an off-the-shelf scaling framework that tells you exactly what to do and when to do it. All the answers for everything right there in front of you, laid out in very prescriptive language. All it takes is one big bang launch. What's not to love, right? Well,
the big bang doesn't work.
Big bangs are big risks. There is rarely a one-size-fits-all approach that comes close to delivering what it promises, because transformations are complex. How you deal with these complexities and the specific context of your organization will define the success of your transformation. I'm Tom Bullock. In this episode, my co-host Bobby Woods talks about scaling done right with Avi Schneier, a principal consultant with Scrum Inc. and contributing editor of the Scrum Scale guide. Welcome back to Unlocking Agile, this time at scale.
Unlocking Agile is brought to you by Scrum Inc. The world of work is changing. We pioneered that change. Scrum Inc's adaptive, scalable process teaches organizations and teams how to thrive in a world where change is the only constant. Better yet, our customized approach consistently produces high-performing and self-sustaining agile organizations and teams. Training that empowers, transformations that work. Contact us at scruminc.com.
We want to welcome everyone to the latest episode of Unlocking Agile, brought to you by Scrum Inc. I'm your host, Bobby Woods, and today we have with us Principal Consultant for Scrum Inc. and contributing editor to the Scrum Scale guide, Mr. Avi Schneier. Welcome, Avi.
Hey, thanks, Bobby. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we appreciate you being here. So, the big reason why we wanted to have you on here as a contributing editor to the Scrum Scale guide was around the complexity that we run into with trying to scale agile and concepts within an organization. And it's a very common problem. We get asked that a lot from companies. How do you reduce that complexity? So I'm just going to throw this question right at you out of the gate. What leads to complexity in scaling? Why is it so hard?
You know, if you take a look at the classic way that scaling is perceived, right? There are actually a lot of different dimensions to scaling, and we talk about this in our class. The first dimension, if you would, of scaling is actually the scale itself, which refers to the number of teams that you're trying to coordinate and also to the complexity of projects. The second dimension of scaling is distribution, in the sense that, and this has become only magnified during our current situation in this pandemic, which is the number of different coordinated geographic locations. Before everybody was in the same building, maybe in multiple buildings on the same campus, but now we're not just everywhere, we're literally everywhere, right? So it's not like, oh, well, we've got an office in Massachusetts, we've got an office in California. No, everyone's home is an office. So the distribution aspect of scaling is now, it's insane when it's exponentially grown. The third dimension of scaling that a lot of folks don't think about is saturation. And that, when we speak about saturation, what we're talking about is the degree to which agile principles have pervaded the organization. And I'd like to say more than just principles, but also practices, right? Because you could have a lot of people who've read stuff about agile, think deeply about agile, and that kind of like, that mindset is all there, but the actual principles are around, but the practices are not, right? So yeah, we think in an agile way, but we're not operating in an agile way. So the saturation is not just the degree of the principles, but also the practices and how much they've actually broken down things like traditional silos and put people onto cross-functional teams, which I think you, myself, and everybody hopefully out there listening in Agile land knows. This is becoming very, very common. In the old days, we used to have to really make arguments for why you wanted a cross-functional team over a silo team. You don't really have to have that as much anymore, but sometimes you do have to have the argument of, hey, it's not just enough to have a Scrum poster on a wall or set as the backdrop on your computer. You actually have to, do the events. You have to do the work.
So let me pause you. Let me pause you there before you get to the fourth one. I want to touch on that third one for a second, just a little bit deeper. You had mentioned that what we're starting to see is more and more people becoming educated about the agile mindset, and yet they're missing at scale some of the sound practices of putting these things in place, and that's a little bit reversed from what we used to have to deal with, which was putting all the practices in, but nobody ever thought that way. So do you see this as an adjustment in how things are getting, how agile is being applied at scale in the modern era?
I would say yes. It's like the difference between, everyone talks about the difference between strategy and tactics, right? Like,
Right.
if you think about it, the agile mindset is essentially like the strategy, right? It's the guiding principles behind which we're going to operate.
Right.
But actually doing Scrum, like all the events, having the roles, having the artifacts, and actually honoring them. So it's not just a matter of saying, oh yeah, you're a product owner, but that when the product owner actually makes a decision, the organization sticks with it. That's all that tactic stuff. And like you said, in the old days, all we went in would do was install, we went in and did the tactical installation was easy. Getting the upper echelons in the business to think strategically in an agile way was very difficult. Now I think we are seeing a lot of the reverse, in the sense that, people are reading the books, they're reading the articles. I mean, if you go and you look at the, not that we, not to point out a publication, but if you go and you look at the HBR, every other article is about agile. Every other one. It's crazy. If you take
That seems like every link I get from HBR from somebody.
Yeah, and it's all about agile. You take a look at that magazine 10 years ago. Agile? What are you talking about, right? It's completely changed. And it's not like agile was born 10 years ago. We all know that agile was born actually 21 years ago, right? So the answer is, it's just that everyone's now reading it. It's so pervasive in the business literature. It's out there and being accepted as, yeah, this is an actual way to operate, an operating system, if you will. Agile ways of working. You'll hear that all the time. So yeah, that's become a lot easier, but that doesn't mean that installing the tactical part is any different, right? That's the same amount of work as it always was, right? The difference is now there's a little bit more, what some people might call executive sponsorship. Now, that is another level of complexity, is that, and we can talk about it later if you want, but I'll say it now, which is that, some of the complexity around doing Scrum at scale, or any type of Agile at scale, whatever you want to call it, is around the fact that leadership says they understand it, they support it, they buy in, but that's not enough. I tell everybody wherever I'm at, I don't need your buy-in. Buy-in is lip service. I need participation. And I think that that's one of the ways where Scrum at Scale is really different than a lot of the other out-of-the-box or off-the-shelf scaling frameworks, is that, if you take a look at their diagrams or however they want to sketch themselves out, you can see where the leaders are, but you don't necessarily know exactly what they're doing. Whereas in Scrum at Scale, we're really clear on a few things. I mean, our framework is a collection of components, which, if you really think about it, are a bunch of questions that each company has to answer for themselves. But when it comes to what the executives do, that's actually kind of clear. There's the executive action team, and there are the meta scrums or the executive meta scrum, depending upon the size of the implementation. And their job is to decide what we are making, or help on the how side to get it out faster to customers. So that's actually really clear, but that requires participation, not the, hey, this sounds great, why don't you do it attitude.
So let me ask you this. Is this part of what led to developing Scrum at Scale?
100%. 100%. But the other one, believe it or not, that led to developing Scrum at Scale was actually the fourth dimension of scaling, which is velocity. So a lot of times we talk about speed of development. And if you take a look at the beginning of the Scrum at Scale guide, right, in the very opening paragraphs that Dr. Sutherland and I penned together, you know, his original experience was that it was very hard to reach a point where you could keep adding more teams and not see productivity completely fall off. So one of the things that really inspired him was he could get a team running really fast, right? And that was great. But the minute you started adding more teams, things started to slow down. And some of the ideas behind, well, how do we then develop Scrum at Scale? Like, how did this all develop was, great, I got to figure out how do we add more teams, but not slow down. And that meant killing a lot of the overhead that was unnecessary. And some of that is communications overhead, as well as decision-making overhead, right? You know, if anybody out there in Agile Land who's listening has ever attended one of my classes or workshops or stopped me in the street and recognized me or something, which is rare.
That didn't happen.
No, that doesn't always happen in Agile. Yeah. At a conference once in a while, and said, you know, they might remember hearing me say that consensus is the enemy of progress. And that is something I say all the time, because it's just the truth. Try to get something done, and if everyone has to agree, and I'm holding a thumbs up here for those of you who are watching at home. If you have to get thumbs up from everybody, then you wonder why nothing ever happens, right? Which is why we have in the Roman voting system in Agile, right? It's not just thumbs up and thumbs down; it's also thumb sideways. And this is where we say it's consent over consensus. If you got thumb sideways, that's just as good as thumbs up, right? Because you have to get started. That's the whole thing about doing Scrum and being Agile is, okay, let's get going. If we're going in the wrong direction, great. Do short sprints, figure it out as fast as you can, and pivot. But don't just not start. That's not helping anyone.
Yeah, it's that phrase, if we had to wait for everybody to agree on something, nothing would ever get done.
And that's the way most businesses have operated for decades. I mean, you take a look at the businesses that have been eaten up by their Agile competitors. It's because they were still sitting around for consensus. You know, even like some companies that we work with, and I won't name them by name, but I'll name the industry. I'll name pharmaceuticals as an example, right? To get something done, you have to go in front of what in business world they might call a steering committee, but in the pharmaceutical world is known as a scientific review board. You have to like actually present stuff. It's kind of like a pitch meeting. I mean, they don't use these words because they're scientists. They're not salespeople, right? But it's essentially a pitch meeting is what it is. And if you don't get past that pitch meeting, you don't get funded.
Almost sounds like change control.
It is. But the question is this: how often do they meet? Oh, once a month, once a quarter in some places. Okay, how agile can that be? It can't. So when we set up shop in these places to help make them agile, we help them understand that you need to supplant the original scientific review board, the SRB, with a Metascrum designed to make decisions faster. Fill or kill, pick the projects up, staffing decisions, whatever it is. But that you're never going to achieve business agility by just having a bunch of teams and Scrum Masters in place. That's not where business agility comes from. You could say you're going to achieve team agility, I'll buy that. But if the whole business isn't agile, it doesn't matter how agile the smallest piece is, right? Right? The chain is only as strong as the weakest link, right? The train only can travel as fast as the slowest car. Well, guess what? The agility of your business is governed by the least agile portion. So if the least agile portion is management or upper management or your steering committees or your financing model, well, then that's actually what you have to target to remedy, because the rest of the company could literally run at light speed, but you're chugging away at 6 miles an hour. Well, come on.
Yeah, and that's such a common misconception that we run into, is that we can just make all our teams run with Scrum, become Agile, and the whole organization will wind up operating that way. And it's just not true. You have to see it holistically, which means it has to scale, which leads to my next question, which is, okay, then Avi, how does Scrum at scale reduce complexity of scaling agility?
So what I would say before I want to answer that question is, when you think about the complexity, it's just what you said, it's holistic. So if people do not start, they say, okay, let's make this place more agile, but they don't start from a holistic perspective. That's why they don't get the results that they want. Because again, imagine a car with 4 wheels. They're literally saying, well, let's just grease the one, and that wheel's not on the drivetrain. Like let's pretend the car is front wheel drive. Let's just grease the rear right wheel. That's not going to do anything, because it's the engine and the front wheel drive that actually gets the speed going. So when you say, how do we reduce complexity? First, let's acknowledge the fact of why we want to reduce complexity is because we want to grease all the wheels, right? We got to get everything going. Now, does that mean you can get everything going all at once at one time? No, that's probably not going to work either, right? So how we reduce complexity is, one, we take a Scrum or an Agile approach towards the transformation itself. We don't say, let's do one of these big bang transformations, throw the light switch, and everybody's Agile on Monday. First of all, that's a lie. Every case study out there that says that works is a lie. And I know that because the one that everybody likes to point to, ING, I'll call it out by name, a bunch of different large consultancies took credit for that. And I had a conversation with someone at another large consultancy, a competitor, and I was like, oh yeah, but look, they did it. And the leader of that consultancy said to me, he goes, well, how do you know it was successful? And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? Here's the white papers. And he said, okay. And he said, do you have an account at ING? And I said, no. And he said, do you know of any innovative products they brought to market? And I was like, no. And he's like, did you see what happened to the stock price of ING during this supposed victorious big bang transformation? And I was like, no. And I looked it up, and the thing had gone up $2 while the S&P had gone up 30%. So you know what? He was right. It wasn't a success. And then, Bob, I'll tell you this is the funniest thing. I was still so enamored with the case study, I went and I called the head coach that did the work, because I was like, it can't possibly be fictitious. And you know what he told me?
From the horse's mouth.
Yeah, you know what he told me? It was all smoke and mirrors. They wrote the paper after like 2 or 3 months, and everything was nice and peachy keen. 6 months later, that division had gotten merged with another division, which didn't do Agile, and they killed it instantly. It was just a giant rollback. And we've all seen that happen in the right? Anytime leadership changes, a lot of times your Agile transformation will backslide tremendously. So what's the point of all this? The Big Bang doesn't work. You have to take an iterative approach to doing this, and that's why Scrum at Scale does. In Scrum at Scale, we do in the beginning is we want to set up the team process, the executive meta scrum or the meta scrum that supports it in terms of saying this is what we're going to make, some type of executive or leadership action team, depending upon the scale of the company, that's going to get impediments out of the way. And this is important, those two teams are going to figure out how we make everything transparent and what metrics we're going to judge success by. And when we say that, I say two areas: the success of the transformation, yes, but also the success of the products that we're making. Those 4 components together, the team process, the EAT or the LAT, the leadership action team, whatever you're getting together, the MS or the EMS, the Metascrum, the executive Metascrum, and the metrics and transparency that they create and foster, those 4 things together are the heart of Scrum at Scale. You set that up first as an experiment. You build what we call a reference model, a group of teams that are working well for a certain period of time. And then you actually say, hey, by this time, we want to see these needles move in this direction. If that has worked, then that's when you start to actually scale. And I want you to imagine, I'm drawing, for those of you watching at home, I'm drawing a spiral, starting in the center and spiraling out. Because that's the idea. You start and then you scale, you spiral out. Maybe you spiral out to more teams. If you're in a project world, you're spiraling out to more projects. If you're in a product world, you're trying out to more products, more solutions, more portfolios. And maybe if you want to really do Scrum at Scale, you're spiraling out to other functions. You're doing it in HR. You're doing it in procurement. You're doing it, at the leadership is scrumming themselves. So Scrum at Scale reduces complexity by starting simple, trying to set up a simple group of teams, 3 to 9 teams, let's say, that are dependent upon another to deliver something. You get that working well. You knock out the organizational impediments that are in the way, and then you scale up. Because if you have a broken system and you try to scale, all you are scaling is a broken system.
So if you started small right here, Avi, sorry to interrupt you. If you started small right here and you're starting to expand that out, what qualities, what outcomes should you expect to start to see because you've kind of done it the right way?
So one of the things again, going back to the notion of the dimensions, one of the things you do want to see is team velocities going up. Now, obviously velocity is a metric like any other can be gained. It's very important that people understand in order to do this correctly, whether it's single team Scrum or multi-team Scrum at Scale, is velocity has to be recognized as a planning metric, not a performance metric. If you can do that, you will see the velocities go up, and then you will actually see more throughput. And then the real thing, so again, Bob, to the EMS and EAT thing, what metrics do you want to track to show success? Is it, for example, if we're doing an implementation in an internal division, that may not result in greater sales, but what it might result in is greater impact inside the organization. Maybe there's less time getting things processed, or less time getting solutions out to, like in the pharmaceutical world, right? We're trying to get data collection programs in the hands of researchers. And we want that data quality to be higher so that the data lake is more pure when they go into, to do their data science analysis. Okay, so you can put metrics on all of those things. It's really important that the people in charge say at the outset what the metrics are that they want to see change. It's better if they can benchmark and then see the change. But a lot of times, unfortunately, benchmarking isn't always possible. But at least they can say, hey, we'd like to see this needle move in this direction.
If you've got these teams that have this path for blocker resolution, prioritization taking place, decision-making going on, all the way up to the highest level, what does that do for overall program and organizational performance and delivery?
So this is where reducing the complexity helps, right? Because that is what you're trying. Listen, you're not going to get rid of the fact that people need to agree with what teams are making. You're not getting rid of that. But what you can get rid of is the 15 different meetings where that happens, and get it into a single forum, the Metascrum, and get those Metascrums dovetailed into an executive Metascrum. So we say, hey, you have a voice in saying this stuff. You got to come to this place at this time and speak your piece. Your truth to power, or whatever expression people want to use for that kind of thing. And you got to get it out there, right? This is where we say this is the single place for the saying what your preferences are, putting it out there like that. And if we get that all in one place at one time, and we drive that meeting to done by making decisions saying this is going to go into backlogs, that simplification, that reduction in complexity gets the teams moving faster, because a lot of times, and we've all done this, we've all been in situations like this. It's a game of hurry up and wait. Hurry up, make this. Okay, what's the next thing we're going to do? Hold on a second. We're figuring that out now. Okay, so this is why the whole idea of a cadence and an organizational sprint pulse and backlog refinement from a scaled perspective, the Metascrum perspective, is so essential. They need to be 2 or 3 months ahead of the teams. So that the teams always have fed a constant flow of work. In the lean world, they talk about this a lot, this hijunka, this continuous flow. It's not just continuous flow on the assembly line. It's continuous flow of ideas to actionable backlog pulled into teams so they can keep putting out the awesome stuff that they do to get the customer outcomes that we're trying to achieve, to get the business results that our organization is set out to, was created to get.
So all these things wrapped up together, Avi, how do the components of Scrum at Scale reduce complexity?
It's a great question, Bob. So what I like to say is that the components of Scrum at Scale, and I said this before, are essentially a series of questions that have to be answered. Take for example, the component of strategic vision. So it doesn't say that you just have to have a strategic vision. It's also about How is that vision communicated? And what metrics do we follow to make sure we're actually on the road to achieving that vision, right? And every company is going to have a different set of answers to that question. So the way Scrum at Scale actually reduces complexity, and I know this is going to sound weird, is actually by not providing an out-of-the-box, off-the-shelf, standard set of answers to that question. A lot of other scaling frameworks out there, they're like a box, right? And I'm going to use the box analogy. Imagine a solid cardboard box. And they don't care what your company does, how big it is. They try to shove you into that box. And what ends up happening in a lot of these places is the walls of the box break. Scrum at Scale, because we're asking questions rather than providing answers. Think of, instead of a box, I want you to think of a wireframe cube. You can stuff any company in there. And yeah, it's going to bulge out a little bit over here, or it's going to bulge out a little bit over there, but it doesn't break the wireframe. See what I'm saying? That is actually how we reduce complexity, because we're not telling you there's only one way to do this. It's this way or no way. Instead, we're saying that no way is way, if you want to get like really Bruce Lee about it, right? About this. When you're really
It
Bruce
is
Lee
water.
about this. Yeah, be like water, my friend, right? So no way is way. You actually discover the way as you go, which is exactly what Agile is about, discovering as you deliver. In Scrum at Scale, we are discovering better ways of creating our organization as we do it. And that's actually why it reduces complexity, even though it's a little bit scary at the outset, because you have this general goal, let's be agile, but you really don't know the path. But if you have these components as signposts to say, I need to solve for this problem. How do I put my product in my customers' hands that makes them the happiest? Great. And then you start figuring out solutions for that. You start making backlog for that. You make experiments for it, and you iterate. You end up at a better answer than if you looked at a diagram and said, this is how we deliver, and it's the only way we deliver.
Avi, this is tremendous food for thought around the complexity with scaling and how Scrum at Scale applies. Really, thanks so much for being on with us today and helping us to see that really a key to unlocking agility in an organization is through being able to take something lightweight like Scrum at Scale and apply it well and seeing holistic improvement through the company. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Bob. I really appreciate it. I look forward to hearing the redacted version of whatever I've said, and enjoyed this conversation tremendously.
All right. Thanks to everybody for listening. Again, I'm Bobby Woods. Keep an eye out for the next episode of Unlocking Agile, brought to you by Scrum Inc.
One last thing. If you're enjoying Unlocking Agile, please leave us a review and a bucket load of stars. It helps spread the word about the podcast and agility.